Hello, my name is Amanda Skidmore, and I'm the Integrated Pest Management Specialist for NMSU. Today we're going to be talking about how to scout your chili fields for different pests.
Integrated Pest Management, or IPM, can be defined as an effective and environmentally sensitive approach to pest management that relies on a combination of common sense practices. It has the goal to keep pest populations below the level at which a pesticide is necessary. So its focus is on management of pests and managing host stress instead of trying to control every pest that we see in the field. When we're talking about pests today, we're going to be talking about insects, weeds, and plant pathogens that might be impacting our chili production. So when we talk about IPM, some of these common sense practices that we want to utilize are going to be looking at weather patterns, trying to plan according to pest thresholds, trying to keep good records, also using tools in the field like mechanical controls, cultural controls, chemical controls, and biological controls. We also want to evaluate the effectiveness of our treatments and how we're managing our chili crop from year to year. One of the key ways that we can incorporate IPM into our production system is inspecting and monitoring our chili for pests. One of the most important things about scouting is learning what pests you might encounter in a chili field. We have several different guides and publications that might be helpful, from Economic Insects of Chile, to Growing Chili Peppers in New Mexico Gardens, to Field Production of Organic Chilies, to several other great guides that you can find on our website. You can also check out the Chili Pepper Institute for more great information. Another tool that can be used is a record book. Keeping good records of things like soil tests, irrigation schedule, fertilization, pesticide application, and planting dates and plant life stage can help us identify pest problems when they occur and help us trace back to when they might have started. Another good thing to do is to scout your fields weekly. So the recommendation is 30 plants per acre. And what you want to do is you want to examine plants and record the pests that you see, the fruit set, and the crop stage. You can also use a type of data sheet to help you keep your records straight. You can create one for yourself, or there's several available online, like this one shown here from University of Massachusetts Extension. When you look at your plants, you want to search the plants thoroughly. You want to look at leaves, stem, and the base of the plants. And if you're having trouble with a root pest, it doesn't hurt to dig the plant up by the roots and see what's going on underneath the ground.
When we scout individual chili plants, we want to take time to look at the whole plant because different pests attack different parts of the plant. So the first thing you want to do is you kind of want to take an overview of your plant and just look to see if you notice any spotting or insect damage or anything that looks abnormal. So for this plant, the first thing we're going to do is kind of just look at the tops of the leaves. I'm not seeing anything too worrisome here. This looks like a pretty standard chili plant. And then a lot of insects don't like to be in direct sunlight. And some of our other types of pests don't like that as well. So what we want to do is we want to turn over some of the leaves and look on the back sides of the leaves for any pests that might be present. So we'll do this for the top or the crown of the chili plant, just looking for any pests we might be able to find. And then we're also going to come closer into where the stems are and check for any pests that might be along these stems. And we also don't want to forget that a lot of pests like to be down at the ground. So we want to check the base of our plants for any pests that might be hiding down at the ground. There are a couple different tools that we can use while we're scouting in our fields. So one of the tools that's really helpful is something called a sweep net. Now, this is where you can take it and you can sweep over the tops of the plants and do a couple of these back and forth to be able to collect insect pests down into the net that you can then look and observe and be able to identify. But one of the concerns about using a sweep net in a chili field, especially one that is almost ready to harvest, is that we don't want to beat the plants up so that they end up dropping the chilies on the ground and wasting the produce. So this late in the season, we're not going to be so much worried about our sweep net. But if you still want to be able to look at your plants and try to determine if there's any pests present, one tool that you can use is something as simple as a white sheet of notebook paper, or if you have a white bowl or even a white 15-gallon bucket. And we want to choose white because anything that hits the white background will be really visible to us. We actually do want to look at our chili fruit itself and see what we're looking at here. So we have this whole chili, and we want to look at where it's connected all the way down to its tip, just to see if there's any type of pest damage. If we look at this plant as we go through, we can see that there's a little bit of damage of some sort to this leaf. This looks like it was probably a leaf mining fly that did some damage to the leaf. But at this late stage of the chili, we're not so concerned about what our leaves look like as much as we are what our fruit looks like, because we know we're very close to harvest, and the leaves are going to be less important than the fruit itself. So long as our fruit's looking good, we don't need to worry about our leaves as much. The other thing that I wanted to share with you is that as we go through, and if we notice insects or plants, it's always good to have a little vial with you. So this is a vial that I pulled out of the lab, but you can always use a pill bottle. You can use a mason jar. You could put a little ethanol on the bottom of it, or just rubbing alcohol. And then as you see pests as you're going through the field, you can drop them into the vial, and then you can take them to your county extension agent or submit the samples to the plant diagnostic clinic to determine what these pests are. Because one of the most important parts about treating for pests in a field is that we need to know what pest we're treating. We don't want to identify an insect and say it's for sure this when it's actually something else. We have a lot of beneficial insects that can be impacted when we treat with different things. So getting a good identification on whatever pest you might be having and learning what the proper treatment is important.
When we go out to the field to scout, it's important to regularly inspect and monitor our plants for pests. So this needs to start when you plant. So if you are planting transplants that are in a greenhouse, you need to monitor for pests within the greenhouse. And when you first plant them into the ground to make sure that your plants are in good shape. And you also need to check regularly if you are direct seeding as soon as the plants emerge from the ground. If damage is observed, it's important to ID the cause. Could it be an insect, an animal, some type of abiotic stress, which would be from heat or frost or sun scald? Is it some type of a chemical drift? Is it some sort of a plant pathogen? Also, when you're looking at your plants, note which part of your plant is being attacked and at which stage the pest is causing the damage. So what's the stage of the plant and what type of damage are you observing? It's important to get a good idea of what your fields look like when you're scouting. One way that you can do this is using a simple tool like Google Earth to get an overhead shot of the area that your field is located in. Now, this isn't updated live time. Some of these images could be a couple of years old, but it can give you a good overhead of your field and where you can mark on your map for where you would like to scout. So here's a map of our field. And when we're thinking about scouting, we want to think about different areas of that field that we would like to scout. When we go out to scout our field, we want to make sure that we're not concentrating in a couple areas. Oftentimes, we might just think about scouting in one location because it seems easier than walking across the whole field, or we might consider just going to the edges of the field where we can easily access the plants. But this is kind of a poor or an incomplete picture of what's going on in your field. So what you really would like to do is do a good and thorough walkthrough of your field. And there's a couple different ways you could do this. You could pick several locations across the field that you examine 5 to 6 plants and then move on to a new location. Or you can kind of walk a zigzag pattern across the field and stop every so often and look at plants until you get to 30. And that way it gives you a good ability to cover your whole field and not just focus on areas.
So one of the things that's good to point out when we're surveying for pests in our field is to recognize that around the edges of our field, we're oftentimes going to see a little bit more damage and a little difference in size of our plants. And this is due to wind pressure, to the way that some pests move into or out of the field. So if we look along this edge and we see that some of our plants aren't doing as well as those that we see in the middle, that's not as much of a concern as if we look in the middle and we see patches or holes of plants missing. So when you're walking your field and you're trying to determine the best way to see if there's pests, things that we want to look for are size of plants. If we notice that there's some plants that are a lot smaller than other plants, that's a sign that there might be something wrong. And we also want to look for color. So we want to make sure that our plants are all the same uniform color and that we don't see patches where the color changes, because color can tell us a lot about the nutrients, and it can also tell us a lot about whether or not the plants are stressed. So looking for signs of stress and disease are important when you're scouting your field.
As you examine your plants in the field, there's several key things to look for. One is discoloration. So discoloration could be a sign of a nutrient deficiency, some type of abiotic stress like sun damage. It could be a pathogen that is causing the plant problems, or it could even be some type of chemical exposure. Fruit drop and fruit damage are things to look out for. Of course, the fruit is where we're going to be harvesting and getting our profit from. So we really want to focus on our fruit. And sometimes this type of damage can be due to a pathogen. It could be due to a failure for the plant to properly pollinate. And it could be due to some type of animal damage or mechanical damage in the field. Considering things like plant wilting, it could be due to a pathogen, it could just be due for the need for water, it could be due to frost damage earlier in the season. So monitoring your plants helps us to look out for some of these key things. Another thing that might not be as apparent as damage to our foliage is also damage to our root system. There's different pathogens that might attack the roots of the plants. There's different pests that might attack the roots of the plants. So we really need to focus on this area if we don't see any apparent foliage damage happening. Another key thing to look out for is insects and their damage. Sometimes we can actually see the insects in the field, and sometimes we might just see their impact afterwards. So that might be through chewing damage, or it might be through disease transmission that we see once the pests have already left the area. It's important to identify pests before making a chemical application. This will not only reduce the amount of chemicals you're putting into the environment, but it will also save you money. Here's a good example. Both of these insects are flies with yellow bodies, bright red eyes, and black markings on their body. From these pictures, you can tell that there's a difference. But what if I told you that they were only about 1/4 of an inch long? I don't know about you, but I definitely need a hand lens or a microscope to be able to identify what these two flies are. On the left-hand side, you can see this is a leaf mining fly that can do damage to our foliage. But on the right-hand side, we see that this is a beneficial fly called a syrphid fly that is good to have in our fields because their larvae or their immatures are predators of soft-bodied insects like aphids and thrips that could be causing damage to our field. So having a good identification of what you're seeing is important. The NMSU Plant Diagnostic Clinic is an excellent resource for learning how to identify what pests you might have. The key steps for submitting a sample to the clinic is to contact your local extension agent. There's an extension agent in every county who can help you through this process. Collect fresh samples of either the pest or the damaged plant tissue. And you can also visit the website to find out more information about submitting samples.